What's up, Graham?
What's up, man?
How are you?
I'm good. How are you, man? Thanks for having me.
Man, thanks for coming on. It's so weird because you're actually in the same office with me. You're just in another office.
Right.
I just don't have the technology. Well, I don't have the equipment to set up with like two or three cameras yet. So it
Which
kind of
works
feels,
out great though.
it does. It feels weird talking to you through a screen, but you're in the office just over there.
About 10 feet away. Other side of
Yeah.
that wall. Yeah.
So how long have we known each other? It's been what, 2000?
I was actually thinking about that yesterday or whenever it was when you asked me if I could come out today. And that'd been 2010. So
Yeah.
13 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
Right. Long
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. Hey, I got some good news.
Mm-hmm.
For those of y'all that don't, let me give you a little background. There's some weird contract stuff going on with the Atlanta Braves where it's hard to watch them on TV. You gotta have like this certain type of subscription, and it might work for a month. Anyway, I stole my brother's Bally's login and password,
Yeah.
so I'm actually able to watch Braves games now. So I'm
There you
fired up
go.
about that.
I watch every game.
Yeah,
Every game. So there's certain things, there's certain things people will spend money on and there's certain things people won't spend money on. And I will spend money to make sure I have every channel for every sporting event and things I like to watch, especially football. My wife asked me just the other day, we were budgeting because we actually just bought a new car recently. So we're redoing budgets and looking at what we should spend. And she said, "Hey, we got this ESPN Plus account. We need to keep this." I was like, "That's not going anywhere. Like football season about to start, right?" She's like, "But I think most of the Georgia games will be on major networks." I was like, "Yeah, those are for the other games that I want to watch too." So yeah,
exactly.
I gotta have my sports channels. So
So I haven't looked into any stats, but
mhm.
just the just the games I've watched in the last 2 weeks,
Yeah,
I'm of the opinion that Major League Baseball has juiced the balls up again.
they're hitting the ball, aren't they?
Dude, I mean, the Braves are just hitting bomb after bomb. I'm talking like it looks like batting practice most games.
They're seeing the ball. It's about this big, but they're. I was telling my son Noble the other day. And again, he's 8, so he probably doesn't understand. And I'm like, I don't. I was telling him, I said, "Son, I don't think you understand what you're watching. Like, this is probably, regardless of what happens in the playoffs, this is arguably the best Braves team ever right now, and just privileged to be able to even be alive just to watch him and see Acuna playing and what he's doing, and it's fun. It's fun to watch.
Yeah,
They're exciting.
yeah. I came up just like you. We've been following the Braves for a long time, so we've seen the ups and downs.
Yeah.
I will agree with you on this. Hands down, this is not the best pitching staff we've had
No.
because you got the Glavin Smoltz era.
Yeah.
But as far as the bats go, wow,
Yeah. Yeah. I
wow,
mean, when you score 13, 14 runs a game, your pitching doesn't have to be the best. It's like, God. Yeah,
yeah,
they're
good
fun.
point.
We're big Braves fans. I've got my fingers crossed on. I'm on the list now. Granted, I'm like in line of there's like 4,000 people in front of me, but I'm in line to try to get some season tickets. So we'll see if that happens. So any
Yeah,
prayer warriors out there, you can pray for my season tickets to come through.
let's pray for Graham's season tickets. Season tickets are more appealing now that they're in the new park.
Yeah, for sure.
When they were at Turner Field, there's no way I would even consider it.
No.
But this new park, Truist, man, it's nice over there.
Yeah, it's fun to go to. You can
Mhm.
take the whole family down there. We've gone down and haven't even gone to games. We'll just go hang out, eat dinner, watch the game on the little turf lawn out front. So
Yeah.
they're fun. They're exciting this year, man, for sure.
Man, they
And I got
are.
a wife that loves baseball, so she watches every single game every night with me too. So I'm blessed
Yeah,
to have that. So
you're not watching the game and getting in trouble.
no,
Yeah.
yeah,
Hey, so here's what I think I want to do. Since this is your first time on, I know you're going to be on several times. We have so many conversations ahead of us that I want to share with people. But since this is your first time on, just kind of give people your 10-minute story of how you got to where you are. If you go 15, 20, that's fine too. But just kind of your short story of where you got to where you are today professionally, like considering like what you do for a living. How'd you get here?
Well, I tell people God works in mysterious ways, and he doesn't, we don't think the way he does. Cause I can tell you, when I get to the end to tell you where I'm at today, I probably would have chose a little bit of a different route than the way that I went. Um, but we go through what we go through, and I wouldn't be who I am today without everything that I've been through. So, a little bit about me. I'm 37. I usually ask my wife when she's here. She tells me how old I am, but I'm 37 years old. Um, Grew up not too far from here in Peachtree Corners, Norcross area. Um, got one older sister. She's 4 years older than me. Mom and dad. Great family. Um, Super close to my grandparents and all my relatives and all that kind of stuff. So we had a huge, we were always together. Family did everything together, right? I tell people that I grew up in the church, and I just mean that, meaning I grew up going to church, but I had zero relationship with God or even knew what that meant. So we went on Sundays. In my mind, we checked the boxes. We prayed at dinner. We did all those things. No relationship until later on down the road in my life did I have a relationship with God. So, I found out early on I was blessed and really good with athletic ability and sports. So my identity quickly got wrapped up into that. My sister was very athletic. Both my parents were athletic, so that just became a thing. We were always on the go. Sports, baseball, football, basketball. She did gymnastics, cheerleading. It was all those things. But again, I found my identity in it. There's lots of things that I really didn't like about myself growing up, but I could make all those go away with being popular and friends and athletics and all those types of things, right? Mm-hmm. But for the most part, really, really good, loving childhood. My parents were, happily married for a long time, and it wasn't until high school for me that things kind of started shifting and changing a little bit, right? So getting back to the athletic stuff, when I got into high school, again, was blessed that I got to play on the varsity teams for a lot of stuff. So as I was 14, 15 years old at the time, but then now I'm kind of hanging out with kids a lot older than me. And again, what I'm getting ready to say, I'm not blaming it on the older kids, but I was very impressionable, and my identity was so much wrapped up in sports and friendships that I had this extreme fear of rejection, right? So I was not willing to do anything to feel any type of rejection from anybody, right? So by the time I get into high school, I had experimented with drugs and alcohol a little bit, but only a little bit, because I knew when I was doing these things, like I knew right from wrong from the way I was raised. Like from the initial time in 8th grade, I think when I drank for the first time or smoked weed for the first time, I knew when I was doing it, I was like, this is a very bad idea, right? I should not be doing this. And I would get in a whole heck of a lot of trouble if my parents knew I was doing this, right? But everybody else is doing it, so hey, I'm going to do it too. Fast forward, get into high school, hanging out with the older crowd. Well, what are they all doing? Or at least the crowd that I thought, the popular crowd, the crowd I thought I needed to be with, they're all drinking, doing the same thing. So I'm gonna follow suit and do that, right? So that was kind of my whole high school, career, and going through school was relationships, and then also drinking and using on the weekends and those types of things, right? Again, athletics were still a big thing for me, so I was blessed to be able to have experiences of doing really well in baseball and being the starting quarterback of my high school team for a couple of years. And again, all that stuff was great, but my world really shifted quickly my junior year in high school. And I'll tell the story. I'll tell it kind of quick. As I was standing out in the outfield at baseball practice, right? And when people from far away, you can tell someone's talking about you, right? Mm-hmm. I'm standing in the outfield shagging fly balls. My football coach, who shouldn't be at baseball practice, is talking to the head baseball coach, and I can tell they're definitely talking about me right now, right? Like they keep looking my way. Something's going on. Little did everybody else know, I had some illegal substances in my car. We won't get into those details, but people were getting in trouble at school around that time. So they called me from the outfield. I remember telling my friends, like, hey, I'm in trouble. They're about to search my car. Someone told on me or whatever it is. So anyways, long story short, I get in the car with my football coach. He hands me the phone. He says, your dad's on the phone. Your mom's in the hospital. She had a brain aneurysm. She's not doing well at all. Right. So in that moment, my world just got flipped upside down. Right. Because literally just that morning, I was hugging and kissing my mom goodbye, to go to school. Because I was a mama's boy, right? Very much so a mama's boy. She's making me breakfast every morning. I was 16 years old. She was still scratching my back at night, like all this stuff. She was the only person up until this point too that I had fully gotten vulnerable with on stuff, that I would cry to, that I would talk to someone about stuff. So needless to say, this was a huge shock, right? Long story short, she passed away the next day from a brain aneurysm, and my world just shifted then, right?
Right.
My view of God and everything changed. These masks I tell people I was wearing at the time, because I was hiding all my drug use, alcohol use, all this kind of stuff from people at the time. Because again, I was a starting quarterback and star baseball player. Like I had to hide all this stuff, had to be a certain person, right? And I remember after she passed away, I basically threw that mask in the trash. I said, well, I don't care what anyone thinks of me now. And the little bit of what I did know about God, I said, this is his fault. I'm done with him. I don't want anything to do with this, right? So again, from that point on until for the next really, I guess I was 17 at the time, for the next 4 years, it was just a quick downhill decline, right? Of addiction, my addiction progressively getting worse, because I tell people now from what I do, which we'll get to, is addiction is a progressive disease, meaning if it's not treated or worked on or looked at or whatever, it will get worse, right? It does not get better on its own. It will progressively get worse, some a lot faster than others. And mine, I'm the type of person, whether I'm doing something good or bad, I usually put it in fifth gear and don't slow down. And that typically doesn't work well with an addiction. So mine went downhill really fast. Graduated high school, played college football for a little bit. Ended up quitting that because now I'm using drugs and alcohol a lot. Got into opiates and Oxycontin. This was late 2000s when Oxycontin was a big ordeal. So I did that for a long time. Got arrested about 13 times in like 2.5 years, all for just public intoxication, drinking, DUIs, minor impossessions, all different types of stuff. Because I was lost, man. I was trying to mask this overwhelming and massive hole that I had on the inside from losing my mom and everything else that was going on too. My belief systems were all jacked up, right? So again, it wasn't until I got into a sober living where someone made the suggestion like, hey, Oxycontin's way too expensive. You should try heroin. It's cheaper.
Yeah, here we go.
I remember in that moment thinking, from a financial standpoint, that makes sense, right? So then it took me on about a 90-day period of intravenously using heroin. That's when the wheels really, really started falling off for me, right? Ended up overdosing in a hotel room, almost dying. Finally picking up the phone and surrendering and telling my family, like, hey, I need some help. Like I can't do this on my own. My family at this point had set some really healthy boundaries and sort of cut me off in certain areas and stop being codependent and stop helping me with things. So yeah, it took what it took to almost dying to finally surrender and get some help. And I tell people too, it's crazy because in that moment, I remember waking up out of this overdose and everybody's gone. And it was the first time ever in my life I felt like I heard God speak to me, right? And not a burning bush moment. I didn't hear things, right? But I felt looking in this mirror, looking at myself, coming from this guy who, college athlete, had this great family, everything was going great, to now I'm in this hotel room. I look like a skeleton, almost dead. What are we doing here? And I heard God, what I felt like him saying was like, hey, are you ready? And I remember in that moment thinking, whatever I have to do to not live like this anymore, I'm ready to do it. Right now, there were some months later on we can get into later that motivation changed a little bit because I started feeling better. My mind started playing tricks on me, but it was that day when I made the decision to go get some help, and yeah, that's when everything really changed for me. Now I did have to go do about 60 plus days in jail. Then I went to a place No Longer Bound down here in Cumming and was there for the year program and stayed for an internship. And I think it was during the internship when me and you met.
Yeah, I think I met you at the internship. I think I was going through inner healing, and then you were an intern. I think that's when we actually met for the first time. Yeah. And then when I came on staff there part time, I think that's when we really started getting to know each other. I think we just kind of met each other in passing until then. Yeah.
But so my own recovery is really what got me into being an addiction counselor and an interventionist and doing the stuff I am now. So yeah, get through No Longer Bound, which we can talk details about some of that story later. But one of the hardest things I've ever done, but one of the biggest blessings, obviously, because it's got me where I'm at today. So ended up staying on staff there. Ended up meeting my wife, Erin, while I was on staff there very early. She's amazing. Wouldn't be where I'm at without her today. So ended up getting married, and not long after that, having our first child, Noble. He's 8. He is amazing and a blessing and wild as can be. He's super into the Braves right now too. It's amazing. He's 8 years old. He will sit and watch an entire Braves game from first inning to ninth inning.
Wow.
And I absolutely love it because that's what I want to do too. Mm-hmm. So we got Noble, and then our daughter Andy. She'll be 6 in just a couple of weeks. So I got a beautiful family, which I'm super thankful for. And recovery, my relationship with God and recovery is really what I attest that to. Like it came from that. Without that, I wouldn't have it, So worked at No Longer Bound for a number of years. I now work at another treatment facility called Blue Ridge Mountain Recovery Center. I get to do business development, admissions, all different types of stuff, still run groups. And then also I'm an interventionist. So I've got an intervention business as well. So helping families get their loved ones into treatment, kind of coaching them and teaching them on, how do we help our loved one? How do we help our friends, right? Because it's something that no one plans for these types of things, right? Mm-hmm. Everyone plans for their 401ks and retirement, but no one plans for how do we deal with our son and daughter if they have a drug and alcohol addiction, right? So that's where I love coming in and helping those families out and kind of guiding them through that process. So yeah,
I love it. I don't know how many times I've heard your story, lots, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. But with you, what I love is every time I hear your story, in a way, it feels like the first time.
Yeah.
It really does. Your story is really special to go from, basically overdosing in a hotel room to having the life that you have now. Mm-hmm. It's a miracle. And I think we never get tired of hearing about miracles.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it blows my mind. So I came up on 14 years of recovery, about 2 weeks ago, or no, 3 weeks ago, something like that. And it blows my mind. And I love having opportunities like this because that stuff feels like a dream to me, and it's a good reminder for me of where I've come from, where God's brought me out of, and why I do what I do today. Because I can get caught up in life and the mundane things, and I got to get kids to their first day of school, and I got to do work, right? And you can lose sight of, where you've been and what you've been through. Because again, it feels like a dream. Like I say those things, and I'll talk with people about things I used to do, the way I thought, and things that I've done. I'm like, I can't believe I did that. You know what I mean? It seems so wild, some of the stuff that I did, and it was. But it is. I think it's good to remember, where you've been and where you've come from. So I enjoy doing this. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally get that. Sometimes you look back and it feels like it was a different person, like it was a different life, different person, almost like a movie you watched one time, and so it's good to have moments when we're like, oh no, that really was me.
I really did that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've got some stories, and some of them that we probably don't even talk about on the podcast, but you'll just be like, man, I can't believe I did that. That is, what was I thinking? I'll kill my child if he does that,
I actually think I do want to have that podcast.
We can.
Yeah, this one here's kind of where I want to go today, because I know you and I will be back on this podcast eventually, talking about our stories to help the addict, right? But today, I think I want to start with having a conversation that would actually help the families who has a loved one who's an addict, because, like, to me, that's where it starts. As I listened to your story, you said that your family had started setting up some healthy boundaries.
Yeah.
You and I both know if those boundaries had not had happened, you probably would not have gotten to the place where you said, yes, God, I won't help. Right?
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt. One of the biggest things, what I tell people too, is it's a blessing for me that fentanyl wasn't a thing really when I was using, or I'd be dead right now, you know? And one of the biggest things that saved my life was, again, my family got healthy, right? And I see it time and time again with the families I work with, is the family's willing to do their work, which we can get into what that looks like, looks different for each one. If the family's willing to do their work and they're willing to get healthy, then the addict has a much better chance of also getting healthy too. Something's got to change, right? It's the whole saying in recovery: if nothing changes, nothing changes, right? So we have to change and start thinking differently, doing stuff differently, getting educated, and that's how it's going to work. My dad told me, standing in that parking lot of that hotel room where I overdosed, I remember him telling me in so many words, like, "Hey, I've grieved you already." And I was like, what? How dare you say something like that to me? He's like, listen, you're going to do what you're going to do. That's evident. And we're willing to help you get better. But outside of that, we are done, right? Like, we're not doing this anymore. You know, like, we all have lives to live. I've got another daughter. He had my stepmom at the time, and my grandparents had other grandchildren. Like, everyone had stuff going on. Like, I thought the world revolved around me, you know, and everything was going on with me. And, you know, what they essentially did is, hey, we love you, we'll help you, but we're going to let Graham's problems be his problems. They're not ours anymore. They're yours, right? But yeah, I remember it being powerful when he said, hey, I've grieved you, right? Because we know it's inevitable. We're gonna lose you, and we'll all miss you, and we'll love you, and it's gonna hurt, but, like, life will go on. And we want life to go on with you, but right now it seems like that's just not going to be the option. And we love you, and when you're ready for help, let us know. You know.
And at that moment, you had the experience of, oh, the world doesn't revolve around me.
Right.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Even just that one statement from your dad kind of shifted your perspective of, oh, wow, they're not up all night, you know, thinking about me anymore. They're not enabling that. They're not doing all the things that they used to do. Right. So here is the one thing that the families that I've worked with who are dealing with loved ones who are addicts, you know, the family, they're doing things for the addicts, and it feels like love. And then this is usually the comment I get. And I know you've heard this 100 times. Mm-hmm. If I stop doing these things, if I put him out on the street, he may die, you know? And the response that we have to give that person is, yeah, he may die, but he's definitely going to die if you keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
And that is the paradigm shift in thinking that is so hard for people to get their head around is, yeah, if you turn this person loose to the streets and to their own resources, they may die, but it's really their only chance to eventually live, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I'm sure this is something that you have to talk people through all the time.
Yeah, it's a big fear, especially for, like, a mom and a dad with their child. And I get it on a little bit of that level because I have kids too. They're younger. And that's why it's important to bring someone like yourself or myself in that can be empathetic but is objective to the situation, because they're so emotionally close to the plane that you can't make rational decisions because that's your baby, that's your son, that's your daughter, that is your, you have a God given bond, right? And some of these things that need to be done, especially for an addict, they go against every fiber of your being, right? And when I tell people, like, they'll say, well, I can't do that because that wouldn't be very loving. And I'm like, no, that's the way to love them right now. That's how they need to be loved, right? And I'm not a big fan of the word tough love because I think love is love. It's all the same, right?
Mm.
And because they'll say, okay, so I need to give them tough love. I'm like, no, you just need to love them, right? There's no difference from the warm, pink, fuzzy feeling and what you would call tough love. This is just how they need help right now because they're very sick, right? And yeah, they might go out, they might go die, but more than likely, especially if they're using opiates, they're probably going to die in your basement, right?
Mm.
And then you're going to have to find them. We're going to have to deal with that. And that's traumatic for you and for everyone, obviously, but something has to change. But yeah, I mean, that's what I run into the most is people aren't willing to set the boundaries and do the work they need to because their fear of what could happen. But I always tell them too, like if we're using the example of, for me, my dad said, you can't live here anymore, right? Well, my dad didn't kick me out. I chose to leave, right? Because what he told me was, hey, you can go get some help. I'll help you get help. If you won't do that, you have to leave, right? So again, in my mind, as a 20-year-old addict, I saw that as you're kicking me out. I can look back now on the other side of things and say, we didn't kick me out. I chose to leave, right? I could have gone to treatment, gotten healthy, and probably come back if I needed to. But I made the choice, right? I made the choice to say, I'm not going to get help. I'm leaving, right? And typically what an addict is telling someone when they say, no, I'm not going to get help, is they're not saying I'm not going to go get help. They're saying, I don't want you to change because that means I have to change, right? And I don't want you to stop co-signing on everything that I'm doing, right? So for moms and dads, that's a big one I run into. So I can't kick them out, and I try to reframe their thinking to say, we're not kicking them out. We're giving them an option of a roof over their head, to be taken care of, to be fed, to be helped. If they decide not to do that and leave, they have made that choice to leave. You didn't kick them out, right? So it's reframing, how their lens and how they're perceiving what's happening. So
that's a great point. That's a great point. And I love how this is the first time I think I've heard you talk about this. I don't think we've talked through this before, but the whole idea of, no, it's really not about tough love.
Mm-mm.
Love is love, right? Like Jesus is never going to call on us to stop loving someone.
Mm-hmm.
The question is, what is love supposed to look like right now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it looks different,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What is the most loving thing I can do for this person right now? And it's probably not going to feel like what you're accustomed to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I tell people all the time, outside of what Jesus did for me, the greatest act of love I've ever been shown in my life is when all of my family got on the same page and said, we are done. We're not doing this anymore. Because what it was is one of my God-given gifts is that I can talk, right? That was one of my biggest weaknesses in my addiction is I could talk really good, right? So I could convince you of whatever I needed to convince you of or get whatever I needed from you. If I could talk with you one-on-one long enough, I would one of two things would happen. Either you would start actually believing the BS that I was spewing, right? Which I was really good at getting you to start believing my lies. Or two, I would just wear you down to where you just wanted to be done with me and you'd give me whatever I wanted because you were just so emotionally just beat down, right?
Right.
So I knew that. So I'd manipulate people one-on-one, but I tell families manipulation in a group of people, it can't thrive, right? So that's why it's so important for the family to get on the same page. Well, my family was broken, right? Because I have my dad who just lost his wife, who they met when they were 14 or 15, right? So as bad as it sounds, like I knew what he was going through, and I knew how to manipulate that grief that he was also going through to get what I wanted, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what I needed. My sister was getting married at the time, right? So I could manipulate her, and then I have my grandparents who I was super close with, right? first image I had of God in my head was my grandfather. It was the first picture that I actually saw, which is amazing, which is for another podcast too. But I knew, because this was their daughter who they just lost. Well, I knew, well, they're going to give me everything I need, right? They're hurting. They know I'm hurting. I can play off all of this to get whatever I needed, right? Now, some of this was conscious, some of this was subconscious. I didn't know I was doing it until looking back. But they were always what you would call the weak link, right? My dad got my sister on board. My dad got my aunts and uncles and friends and cousins to say, hey, stop giving him money, stop bailing him out of jail, stop giving him $100 because he said he got a nail in his tire. He's got no nail in his tire. You know what I mean? Like, stop giving him, he's lying to you.
And even if you did have a nail in your tire and they gave you $100 to fix the nail, that just freed up another $100 for dope.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right?
That's what a lot of people can't get their head around. Well, I only give him $50 a week for food. I'm like, okay, even if he does use that $50 a week for food, you're still freeing up another $50 for dope, right?
Yep. Here's a good one. So parents will say, well, they're living in my house, right? And this doesn't have to be a child. I work with families who will say this situation with elderly people and their 50-year-old son or daughters living with them. Mm-hmm. And I'll say, okay, well, do they pay rent? Well, no, well, we don't give them any money. I said, but do they pay rent? And they'll say, no. I'm like, okay, so you're giving them money then. Mm-hmm. They're like, no, they don't. We don't give them any cash. I'm like, the fact that they don't have to pay rent like me and you do means when it's time to pay the mortgage or time to pay rent, whatever money they do have, they don't have to pay that bill. They can go do whatever they want with it. So in essence, you are still providing them with financial means because they don't have to pay for housing like me and you do, like normal, thriving adults do, right? So yeah, for mine, it was getting my grandparents on board. And as soon as they got on board, it took, I think 2 or 3 days later, I overdosed. And the next day I called and said, hey, I'm ready to do what I have to. Because a revelatory thing happens when all of a sudden an addict realizes, oh crap, they're serious, right? Because I had heard lots of threats from my families in the past. I'd never had boundaries. And there's a clear difference, right? Mm-hmm. And a lot of times families have threatened things. We won't let you live here. We'll take this money away. We'll call the police. We'll do whatever. But then there's no follow through. So yeah, no wonder it doesn't work because it's a threat. They don't believe you. They know you're not going to follow through with this boundary or whatever. And when an addict has boundaries versus threats, that's when the magic can start happening, right? And that's when it happened for me, and it's when it happens for most people. So that's what I'm coaching families on is how do we, whatever we're going to vocalize, how do we uphold whatever we vocalize long term, right? Because it may not be like my situation where the next day or 2 days later, it could be 6 months down the road, right? So we don't need to set a boundary and a week later say that didn't work, right? We'll let them come back home or whatever the situation is. Everyone's different. Because if you vocalize a boundary and then you fall back on it, well, now you've just dug your hole even deeper, right? Mm-hmm. And the next time you try to set that boundary or reaffirm that boundary, it makes it that much more difficult, right? So there's a clear difference in threats and boundaries.
Yeah. In just a minute, I want to shift to the family that's dealing with the high functioning addict. Mm-hmm. But this question is going to be geared more toward around the addict that we're talking about. This is more the extreme case where they're not holding down a job. They don't have gas money. They don't have food money. Yeah. So we're still going to talk.
This was my case.
So. Yes. So for this person, what is important for the family to realize is, from what I hear you saying, is the addict does not have the resources within him or herself to be an addict. Like they have to have help to be an addict. So like, it's almost like if they can see themselves as with every dollar I'm giving them, I'm helping dig their grave type situation. Right. Yeah. But if I withhold this roof over their head or this money or this whatever, now at least I'm giving them the chance to hit their bottom and then want to get help. Yeah. Let's make one shift because this is the people that I deal with more. Mm-hmm. And I don't know who's going to end up watching this conversation, but my guess is there's going to be people watching this conversation that's going to fit this box,
Mm-hmm.
where they have the addict in the family, but he or she is holding down a job, right? This was me. I was highly functional, holding down a job, not necessarily getting the DUIs yet.
Mm-hmm.
Just seems to be highly functioning, but drinking themselves to death from, 5 p.m. till they pass out or whatever they're doing.
Yeah.
And then, so obviously the family finally gets to the place where they know there's a problem, and then they reach out to you, right? So they reach out to you as an interventionist. Now you're coming into a family where it's not, the 24-year-old or even the 50-year-old living in the basement with no job.
Yeah.
Now this wife is calling on your help for the 50-year-old executive
Mm-hmm.
who's holding down a job, but is still slowly killing himself.
Yeah.
What is the approach there?
Well, first off, I'll say usually when you see the functioning people, now it's usually alcohol involved, which I tell people, and it's tough because alcohol has a stigma that comes with it as very socially acceptable, right? So right now, if and even I do it sometimes. If I say the word heroin and I say the word alcohol, we feel two different ways about each word, right? Like when you say heroin, you're like, oof, like that's rough. You say alcohol, you're like, oh yeah, like I know people that drink all the time, you know what I mean, or that don't, and it's different because the way our society views it. But I tell people all the time we're dealing with addiction. I feel worse for the alcoholic you're describing versus the heroin addict or cocaine or whatever it is, because heroin and cocaine will take you to the bottom like fast, quick. Whereas alcohol, it's a slow progression, right? And you can keep the wheels on the track for a long time. And sometimes you're drinking, a guy is drinking or a female or whoever is drinking, like you're saying, in the evenings, 5 to 9, passing out, but still being productive, showing up for baseball games, doing all that. But what's happening is physically, you're just destroying your insides and your liver. Mm-hmm. And you're slowly starting to lose things, right? Little bits of relationships, strain on relationships is happening here. Finances, you might get a DUI mixed in there, right? But the problem is when all of a sudden you realize there's a problem, it's almost too late. You know what I mean? Because you're so far down the road now that there might be physical things going on that are irreversible, right? So it's all that to say it's a slow progression where sometimes it gets so deep and you've been doing it for so long that it's hard to come out of it, right? And those guys have the most difficulty, and females too, because psychologically they're thinking, yes, I drink, yes, it's a strain on my family, but I'm functioning, right? Mm-hmm. That I'm doing this and I'm okay. And I still approach that family the same way, meaning I would approach the other one is we're dealing with an adult. We cannot control them because when we try to control things we don't have control over, we just make it worse, right? So let's turn around and point the finger at ourselves and figure out, okay, in this scenario, what do I need to change, right? What can I start doing differently? And that's where you have to start, right? Because we've all got skin in this game. You know what I mean? Not meaning the rest of the family is drinking, but yes, the rest of the family also has their own stuff that they can deal with and they can work on, right? So maybe that's for that person, the example you have. Maybe it's for that wife and those kids. Maybe they need to go to therapy. Maybe they need to get into Al-Anon to start better understanding what the cycle of addiction looks like, what's happening in a person's brain when they're drinking. Maybe they need to learn how to have conversations, right? When their loved one comes home drunk, if he's been drinking and driving. Yeah, he didn't get a DUI, he made it home safe, but that doesn't mean that's going to happen tomorrow, right? So it's just getting educated and working on yourself, right? And really taking an introspective look on what can I start doing differently? What should I start saying and stop saying? What should I start doing and stop doing? And the boundaries that we're talking about that people set, like they're not for the husband that's drinking, it's for the wife that's in the situation. Like boundaries are not for the addict. Boundaries are for the person setting the boundary. They keep you safe and in a healthy spot, right? So reaching out for help, right? Reaching out to someone to figure out what can we do? How do we approach this? And not everyone, I think sometimes people have in mind when they think of someone going to get help, like, oh, they're going off and they're locked away for 30, 60, 90 days, however long it is. Like, not everybody needs that, right? Sometimes it's counseling with someone like you. Sometimes it's outpatient. Like, everyone's different, but navigating what level of care someone needs, that's when it gets tricky. So pulling someone like myself or you in to kind of determine where someone's at, and then help slowly kind of approach and get that person to an understanding of needing some help. That's when it can get tricky. But yeah, I mean, I think reaching out and figuring out what you can do to better yourself, then that's the best way to hopefully get them to change too.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
answer your question?
Yeah. You did. You did. Because it is a complicated situation when you're dealing with a highly functional addict. And I agree with you. Normally it is alcohol that this family is going to be dealing with. But from what I hear you saying, basically that family needs to start with educating themselves, taking care of themselves.
Yeah.
And then once they start figuring out what that looks like, then they can start having better conversations with the alcoholic, right?
Yeah.
Let's go here. This might be where we lose all 12 listeners we got right now.
Right.
Here's what I love about what's going on in society right now is we're starting to see, and I haven't heard this said yet. This is my view. To me, alcohol is probably one of the biggest marketing scams in history. Yeah. And let me start by saying this. I'm not a teetotaler. I'm not saying that everybody out there should stop drinking immediately, never have wine again, never have a beer again. I'm not saying that. Yeah. But let's look at what it is. I think it's the biggest marketing scam in history. Mm-hmm. Alcohol is rotten grain or fruit, right? Mm-hmm. That turns into this very toxic chemical that when you ingest it, it attacks the central nervous system, runs through the brain, mixes with a chemical in the brain, and sets up a new chemical familiar to formaldehyde. Like when you say, oh, that old drunk's pickled, that's actually kind of real. And that chemical never leaves your body, right? Mm-hmm. Brendan Manning, the mentor I never met, died of what they call wet brain because he had so much of this chemical in his brain because it never leaves. All right. Yeah. So that's what alcohol is. Now turn on the commercial and look at the beer commercial. You got on the beach playing volleyball, good times, right? If you look at the bourbon commercial, you got the guy by the fireplace with his yellow lab there, and he's holding his bourbon. Right? It is the biggest marketing scam in history. Mm-hmm. Here's what I love. People are starting to pick up on the dangers of it, just physically. Like you and I both, we're probably podcast junkies. We listen to a lot of them. Mm-hmm. And even the ones who don't know a lot about addiction, like even the doctors or the scientists, or even just, the people that are popular in society that don't know a lot about addiction, we're learning so much about what alcohol does to the body. Mm-hmm. And even just one or two drinks, and then you start really looking at what it does to your body the next day, even though you're not technically hungover. There's so much damage that's happening. Yeah. Here's what's fascinating. People's already ahead of that. Now they got these supplements that you can take. You've seen it. Right. Yeah. Now you've got these supplements that you can take before you drink that they're claiming it's going to negate all of that damage. It is nuts what's going on right now with alcohol. But I am kind of encouraged that society seems to be waking up to what this crap really is. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think it'll keep trending that way. Cause I'm with you. I have plenty of friends, my wife included, family, like they're not addicts. They drink. My wife doesn't anymore. I have a funny story about when I first met her, but we won't get into that one either. They drink casually and they put it down and that kind of stuff. I'm not that person. I heard a friend of mine say one time, like, I'm allergic to alcohol. When I drink it, I break out in handcuffs because it just doesn't work for me. You know what I mean? So, but yeah, I think we've seen that a little bit even with like cigarettes, right? I think a lot of people still smoke, but I think a lot of people started saying like, this thing is really bad for you, right? Mm-hmm. But again, now everyone's just switched to vaping, which again is, in my opinion, is not great for you either, because you see people all the time. They're like, I don't understand why I have so much anxiety, and they've got a triple venti latte that they're drinking and they're hitting their vape, and it's like that eating McDonald's. Like, that's why, you know what I mean? But so yeah, I think we might trade one thing for another, but I have seen the trend has been more, hey, alcohol is not good for you, and sober starting becoming a little bit more trendy and cool for people, which is great, because it breaks that stigma. I also think mental health is now like a bigger, not sticking point's not the word, but it's highlighted more, right? So again, and I mean this in a positive way, like it's trendy to go see your therapist, right, and to work on your mental health, which is great. If that starts getting the awareness out there and gets more people in therapy and in recovery, so be it. But it's definitely talked about more. But I still think the biggest killer for people in addiction is the stigma, right?
Yeah.
Is for families and is for addicts thinking we can't tell anyone about this because no one else understands the shame, the embarrassment, the guilt that comes with it. That's what keeps people sick.
Yeah.
In my opinion. So
Yeah. Let me ask this question, and I'm going to set it up this way. I'm going to set up this question coming from the addict's point of view, but then I want to get it back to the family's point of view. I can remember I was barely sober, and there was the first kind of event I went to sober, and it was basically one of my daughter's friends had a birthday party, so we were at a pool, and there were there were some teenagers around. They were at the pool, and the adults were at a table, and we had eaten, and there was some beer there and some wine there, and it was time to clean up. And I noticed that there was like a half a beer left there and like a quarter of a glass of wine left there. And I'm sitting there thinking, what's wrong with these people? Why? Because, coming from it, from my point of view, you drink until it's gone. You never pour this stuff out. Right. So that was the first time I'd ever really noticed people having a healthy relationship with alcohol, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. That to set up this. Let's say you've got the family that's dealing with the addict. Mm-hmm. It would be very helpful for them to talk to a family that's been through this. Yeah. And, oh, wait, so they do have boundaries. Like they do have this self-respect where they say, no, you're not going to run over us anymore. Mm-hmm. They do understand that this is the best way to love the addict, right? Yeah. And the cool part is, well, not cool, it's actually sad, but everybody knows a family that's dealt with this.
Yeah. Multiple people. Yeah.
Multiple families.
Yeah.
So like I'm sitting here thinking, even if they're not ready to call you, so they're not ready to call Graham and say, hey, I'm ready for an intervention. Mm-hmm. Do you think it would be a wise step for them to at least reach out to that family that they know has dealt with this?
Yeah, no doubt, for sure. Reach out to that family. Even if you don't want to reach out to them, you can go online. You can find virtual Al-Anon meetings. So for those who don't know, Al-Anon, you have AA, which is for the addict and the alcoholic, right? But there are even some open discussion meetings that you don't have to be an addict and alcoholic. You can still go to AA. But Al-Anon is specifically for husbands, wives, kids, siblings, friends who have a loved one or an acquaintance who's in an addiction as well. So you're there with like-minded people. So you can find them virtually, because if we're worried about, will I see someone I know, those types of things, you can do it virtually. But you can find networks of people to connect with, right? And sometimes that's what it takes, right? Is it takes, the mom and the dad or the husband or the wife needs to set these boundaries. They know what they need to do. They just can't do it. They hear it from me. They hear it from you, Jason. They hear it from all these people, other people in their lives. Then all of a sudden they go to this meeting and they hear from a complete stranger that's what they need to do. And it clicks, right? And sometimes it's that connection with someone else. Like, okay, they're doing it, then okay, this must be okay, I'll do it too. And not only that connection, but then there's also the support there, right? So you can go there and say like, hey, I just asked my husband, son, daughter, wife, whoever to leave the home or whatever it might be. And you can go in there and you can be reassured from other families in the same situation. Like, you did the right thing. That's what you needed to do. And it's okay. I know that's not that's not being hurtful, that's loving them, right? And you have your own support, right? Because an addict can't get healthy on his own. He and she needs a group of people and a tribe and a community. And the same way families, they need that as well too, right? So the addict can't recover on their own, and the family can't recover on their own. They need other people. You can't do this thing by yourself.
Great point.
God put us on this earth with billions of other people for the sole reason, in my opinion, to be in relationship and connection with other people. If not, he would have plopped us on the earth and said, "Hey, Graham, hey, Jason, this is all yours. Do what you want with it." Right?
Right.
Like, he gave us other people for a reason, right? So we need those other people. And some people listening probably you've heard this, the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's connection, right? It's connection with other people. And that's what Al-Anon, that's what those groups, that's what reaching out to those other families, that's what that's going to do. It's going to foster connection, and it's just going to make you a better person for sure.
Graham, this has been amazing. I really think that if there's a family watching this that has a loved one struggling with addiction, I know that they've heard things in this conversation that's going to help. I want to have you back probably next month, and we're going to talk about stuff that can actually help the addict. But man, this has been just gold. I mean, this has been absolute gold. Thank you so much for coming on, man. Oh, before we go though, and I'll throw this up on the screen, but I want them to hear it from your voice too. The two organizations that you're with, the rehab that you work for, and then your intervention company. Just kind of if you want to give website, phone numbers, I don't know, just kind of give the names and where they can find you at.
Okay, yeah. So Blue Ridge Mountain Recovery Center. We are located in Ball Ground, Georgia. So detox, residential, and outpatient facility for adult males and females. And then my intervention is called Connector Recovery. You can put the website up there. But what I would tell families is, whether you're ready to have an intervention, whether your loved one's ready to get some help, whatever it is, just call me. Let's talk, right? Because I help people. I do interventions. I help people go to Blue Ridge. I help people go to treatment and get connected all over. Like, I would just love to be a resource, right? Let me help you figure out who you need to call. Because a lot of times, which is great. Like, for instance, Blue Ridge, like, not everyone's a good fit for Blue Ridge, right? Sometimes you need long-term. Sometimes you need gender specific, or sometimes you need outpatient or counselor. Like, I've had the awesome experience and pleasure over the past 5-6 years to just get to have conversations like this and meet all different walks of life and people in the industry. So if I don't know someone, hopefully I do know someone that knows who we can point you in the right directions. I'll find you or help you figure out whatever it is. So just, reach out. I'd love to be a resource. So
that's one thing I've always really respected about you, because what people just heard from you is genuine. Like, even though you work for Blue Ridge, you're going to do what's best for that person. And you're going to get that person where they need to go, because that's what God's got you doing right now. And that is extremely genuine. And I really respect that. Yeah.
Thanks,
Graham.
Man. I appreciate it.
I love you, bro.
Love you, man.
Can't wait for the next conversation.
Look forward to it.
Bye.